In the current cardistry community, live performances aren't the common way for us to showcase our skills. Yet when interacting with laymen, no matter if it's just your friends wanting you to show them stuff, or being hired to perform professionally, live performance is the only way to go. And that is why we have made this complete guide to live performances. From our experience, if a video of yours reaches a wide enough audience online, television programs or news outlets might contact you to feature your cardistry on their platform. And if you take these opportunities, you can help spread cardistry to an even wider audience. Live performances isn't just about showing all the moves you know how to do. You must be able to maximize the impact of your performance. And to do so, you must try your best to control all factors while performing. But oftentimes, there will be a lot of factors that you can't control, and you must understand how to best respond in these situations. So you will start by going through factors that you can control, and move on to factors that you only sometimes can control, and finally to factors that you simply can't control. So with that said, let's get into the first factor of live performances that you have complete control over, and that is the moves you perform. Even though styles of cardistry have evolved a lot over time within the community, laymen's preference of moves have remained the same. This is because laymen do not have the context and knowledge to understand and appreciate certain styles of cardistry. A good example would be two-hand packet cuts. Laymen generally have a hard time appreciating two-hand cuts as the movements are too abstract and complex, and they do not understand the creative process behind creating such a move. So with that said, it is important to note that just because a move is hard to perform or well received in the cardistry community does not mean a lay audience will appreciate it. Instead, what you should consider is the visual impact of the moves and the sequencing of these moves. If you're not sure what we mean by visual impact, you can check out our video, What Makes a Move Good. There we explain this concept in detail. So here we will briefly go over which categories of moves have a relatively low visual impact and which ones have a higher visual impact. Of course, this distinction is not definite or absolute, but this seems to be the general trend we notice from our experience of doing live performances. So, categories of moves with a relatively low visual impact to laymen would be one-hand cuts, two-hand packet cuts, and card twirls. And by this we mean that they are generally more complex, and if you perform too many of these types of moves, they become hard to distinguish from one another. So we would suggest choosing a couple of moves for each of these categories, but to not overdo them in your routine. Categories of moves that have a higher visual impact would be fans, arm spreads, aerials, isolations, structures, and displays. These categories of moves are generally easier to appreciate and do not require a lot of knowledge or context to understand. For these moves, we recommend including more of them in your routine, and you can sequence them according to their visual impact. For example, for fans, you could sequence them as such, starting with a thumb fan, then a riffle fan, into smear fans, and finally a giant fan. Now that you have an idea of which types of moves to include in your routine, we will discuss how to sequence them. Usually, to maximize the impact of your performance, you want your audience to perceive your moves to be increasing in difficulty. It is important to note that what your audience perceives as difficult is not necessarily what you actually think is difficult. We do this because if you start off by showing your most impressive material first, your audience will become desensitized and will not appreciate the rest of your performance. Even material that we consider to be easy, like the Charlier cut or Revolution cut, requires a lot of practice to get smooth. So, we want to make sure to start off with these moves so that your audience can appreciate the amount of work that goes into practicing the more advanced moves. So here's an example of the sequencing of a routine. You can learn all of these moves in phase 1 of this bootcamp. So that was just an example. In reality, there can be a lot of variation in the sequencing of your routine depending on circumstances like the amount of people watching your performance, your distance to the spectators, and the music you're performing to. The last thing to note about sequencing is how you end your performance. From our experience, it would be ideal to end your performance in synchronization with the beat of the music you are performing to, as our friend Harry Kuo does in this clip. Another tip would be to sequence your moves such that you end with a move that makes the audience feel nervous for you because of how difficult it appears to be. You can also pause before or while performing your last move to build suspense. This way, when you do land the move, your audience will be especially impressed. This clip is a good example as the performer ends by catching 2 arm spreads blindfolded. Also notice that he pauses to build suspension before actually catching them. So the next factor that you should have definite control over is the gesture and position of your hands. When practicing or jamming with other cardists, we generally don't pay a lot of attention to the spectator's perspective while viewing the move. So to optimize the experience for your spectator, there are some adjustments that you can make. The first is that a lot of cardists position their hands very close to their body. This can often be subconscious, as doing so will make it easier to catch the cards when you mess up a move. But to make the performance more natural and easier to appreciate for the spectator, you would suggest straightening your back, opening your elbows a bit wider, and shifting the cards a bit higher so that they are in front of your chest. Of course, it is more important that you are actually able to land your moves. But if you plan to perform live, then we would suggest trying to make these adjustments while practicing. You should also be aware of the best viewing angle for each move, and adjust your hands or body to allow your spectator to appreciate the move from the best angle possible. Apart from the positioning of your hands, you should also try eliminating unnecessary regrips or fiddling of the deck. For example, a lot of cardists subconsciously do swing cuts between moves or spend a lot of time squaring an already squared deck. These little details are generally distracting for your spectators. Instead, you can try to integrate moves like deck twirls as transitions for your moves. And if you want to learn some of these transitions and deck twirls, we would recommend checking out Jerry Cestkowski's Encyclopedia of Playing Card Flourishes, which we will link to in the description. Apart from your hands, body language other than your hands can also enhance your performance. This is particularly true for facial expressions. While doing a move, we generally focus on the cards and therefore ignore our facial expressions. We have personally seen this to the point where cardists sometimes have their mouths wide open while performing a move. But as a live performer, it is important to pay attention to this as you are presenting yourself and your cardistry as a whole. If you do not know what to do, just a subtle smile can work. But you can also do things like use eye contact to hint at your audience that this is the important part of a move, or that this is when they should clap. The most easy way to do so is to simply look at your audience. Another example of something you could do would be to wipe your sweat. This hints that whatever you are doing or whatever you will do next is very challenging. All of these gestures can bring a lot of energy to your performance. The next factor that you should pay attention to and have control over is your outfit. You should make sure that your outfit matches the occasion. If you are just casually performing for your friends, then this is not as important. But there might be occasions where you are hired to perform at a certain event. Then you might have to dress accordingly. When choosing your outfit for these events, you should also consider the color of the deck you are using and the background to which you are performing, as you want to make sure that your spectators can always clearly see you and the cards. Next would be the music you choose to perform to. Ideally, you want the track to have a clear rhythm and to gradually build up to a climax and also have a clear ending. When sequencing your routine, you want to do so with the music you perform to in mind. You should also practice your routine with the music playing and know the corresponding move to each point in the music. This way, if you mess up, you know when and which move to perform next to continue the routine. When syncing your performance to the music, you can do so such that the moves are performed slower than you are usually used to. When practicing or showing other cardists moves, we tend to execute a move faster, as ourselves and other cardists have seen the move before and better understand it. But a layman has no idea what is about to happen next, so you want to be sure to give them the time to process each move. This way you also have less pressure and better tempo while performing the moves. Next, we move on to factors that you don't always have control over. The first is the condition of the deck or decks that you perform with. Generally, the deck you perform with will be your own, and in that case you should have a full understanding of what moves you can and cannot perform with the deck. This way you can avoid making a lot of unnecessary mistakes. If the deck you perform with is not your own, say if you do not have your deck and someone hands you one to perform with, then you must be able to immediately understand the condition of the deck, especially because laymen generally do not know what types of decks we use, so you could really be handed any deck of playing cards. So that's the worst case scenario, and if they do know a bit about the cards specifically used for cardistry, then if you're able to pull off a couple of moves with their deck, then they will be even more impressed by the fact that you can perform with any deck. Since we are discussing deck conditioning, we also have to briefly mention fanning powder. Fanning powder can be a very useful tool for live performances as it can transform practically any deck into a very specific condition in a short amount of time. So if you familiarize yourself with that condition, then you can do a lot of moves with greater confidence and certainty. Personally, we like to bring at least 3 powdered and broken in decks to live sets. If you're unsure of how to apply fanning powder or break in a new deck of cards, then you can learn to do so in our deck conditioning tutorial, which we will link to in the upper right corner. The next factor that you may or may not have control over is the environment you perform in. If you can choose the environment, then you want to make sure that the place you perform in has little to no wind, so that your aerial moves won't be affected. You should also try to make sure that the environment is not too humid or too hot, because humidity can easily alter the condition of your deck and make it harder to perform moves like fans. Also, when the environment is warm and humid, you can often develop a lot of sweat in your hands, and that will make it harder to perform a lot of moves. An ideal environment would be an air-conditioned and indoor space. If you cannot choose the environment though, then just like with deck conditioning, you have to immediately be able to know what moves are possible to perform and which moves aren't, and stick to the moves that you know are possible to perform. Finally, we move on to factors that you have no control over. The first would be mess-ups. If you perform often enough, you will inevitably have mess-ups. If you drop a single card, there are a couple of ways to deal with this. The first would be to use humor. For example, you could aggressively kick the card away, or you could also pause and stare at the card silently and disappointingly before continuing your routine. Another way would be to lead the audience to believe that the mess-up was part of your routine, and you could do so by using Andrei Jikh's card in fan to recover the card either immediately or towards the end of the routine. You can learn how to do the card in fan in Andrei's DVD Genesis 2, which we will link to in the description. But if you drop a large packet of cards, then that will directly affect your ability to continue performing. And when that happens, be sure not to pick up the cards. Instead, our go-to solution is just to humorously pull out another deck from your pocket. While you do so, you could also ask the audience to cheer you on as you perform. While these tricks can certainly get you out of mess-ups, you obviously cannot use them too frequently. Ultimately, the most effective way to deal with mess-ups is to not mess up at all. And the best way to do that is to practice a lot before performing. Since we're on the topic of mess-ups, we should also discuss the audience's mentality and how they view these mess-ups. If you mess up once in your routine, that might actually be beneficial, as your audience will perceive what you are doing to be incredibly hard. But if you mess up multiple times, then it will simply look like you lack practice and skills. As previously mentioned, we recommend that you only include moves that you have thoroughly practiced in your routine. Apart from dealing with mess-ups, it is also important to have an eye-catching opening to your routine to immediately grab the attention of your audience. An option could be a box twirl or opener. Hecklers are another factor that you just won't have any control over. If you're performing for a larger audience or on stage, it is less likely that there will be hecklers. It is a lot likelier if you're performing at a close distance for a smaller group of people. The most common way someone will heckle you is to ask you to immediately perform your most impressive quote-unquote trick. And when this happens, it is important that you do not let them dictate the rest of your performance. The easiest way to deal with these people is to simply hand them a deck of cards and have them try to follow along as you do your moves. And they will immediately realize that even the simplest moves like the Charlier is not something that anyone can just pick up a deck and do. Before ending this guide of live performances, we want to briefly discuss the scenario of an interview. During interviews, it is likely that the interviewer would like you to show flashy moves like arm spreads or fans. And if that is not your style, then that is perfectly fine. Just learn 1 or 2 of the basic moves from the style and you should be good to go. For arm spreads, that could just be the regular arm spread and catch, which you can find a tutorial for on this channel. And for fans, just the thumb fan and maybe a giant fan will do. We also recommend that if the interviewer asks you to perform magic, that you do not do so even if you actually know a bit or even a lot of magic. If you want to promote cardistry as an independent art form, then it is important to draw that distinction. Of course, if you were invited to the interview as both a cardist and a magician, then this is completely up to you. So those were all the important factors to consider and to try to control while performing live. We would like to thank the champion of the XCM World Championship of 2006-7, J.S. Lin, also known as Fat Fingers, for sharing with us his years of experience in live performances. Finally, although cardistry, like most other niche hobbies, is predominantly performed by and for people in the community, we hope that cardistry can also be viewed as an art form that can be appreciated in person by a wider audience. And we hope this video has helped bring us one step closer to that reality.